Welcome back to the Regeneration Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm your co-host, Michael Martin, with my friend and confidant, Mike Sauter, coming to you from the Finger Lakes District of New York.
Yeah, it's really popular. The Finger Lakes are trendy, man.
Yeah,
Have you ever really toured them?
not toured. I was in Syracuse around there.
Yeah, yeah. So that would be kind of the eastern mark of the
Uh,
Finger Lakes,
but it's been a long time since
Yeah,
I.
between Rochester and Syracuse. But they're trendy for a reason. I mean, uh I do drive around. A favorite scene is and it's starting now, but like these big bales of hay, right? The circular bales.
Yeah.
When they dot our hillsides from here through the Finger Lakes on some of these, we have so many hills around here, and then how the Amish farms mesh. I don't think there was a book published. It was called The Italians, and a lot of people had it. It was one of these books that a lot of people had in the '80s. Just called The Italians. I forget the author's name, but I picked it up one time, and he was trying to talk about superlatives in the world. And he said Letchworth State Park in fall, and that park is spitting distance from my house.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, you come visit, Mike. We'll host you, Therese.
That
I kind of
would be
kind of bearing the lead about our guest there, or actually revealing the lead.
revealing the lead. And it's hot. Well, it stopped being hot. Thank God.
Yeah, it stopped here just
And
today.
and actually today we talked about this before, but do you guys get deer flies, man? Because that's the
Not
worst.
nearly as bad as you.
God, that was horrible. The last when Daniel Polikoff was here over the weekend, we couldn't go out. We tried to walk down the river and we did, but I think I lost a quart of blood on the way there.
Will
Uh,
any natural repellents work or anything, or
I
is it
don't
just
think so. I mean, because we put some stuff on our hats
yeah?
and they were all over our hats. But anyway, here we are once again.
Say more.
And look, check it out, Mike. You know what this is?
So one time I guessed you had mead when you had
It's not.
something else.
This is
It
something else.
it kind of looks. I mean, it looks clear, like it could be maple water, maybe fermented maple water.
It is very clear. There's a little. It's got a slight yellowish tinge, or
Ginger beer.
it's not ginger beer. It's elderberry or
Elderberry. I knew it
elderflower,
was the elderberry. Yeah.
elderflower beer.
Right.
And it's low alcohol. It's probably only 3% alcohol.
Uh-huh.
So you have to drink a lot of this to even feel it.
Right.
But the reason I'm bringing that up is because our guest this week sent me a
Has a
book
strong
on my
connection to
birthday,
elderberry.
which I keep talking about on the podcast. Uh, and I said here, it's in my other room, but it's uh, on making medicinal and sacred beers, and this is kind of both. And Therese Schroeder-Sheker sent that to me on my birthday, and it's I think it was the best birthday gift I've had in a long time. I'm getting so much use from it.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Oh, good.
So welcome, Therese.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Michael, on that book, you've got to store a lot of different things at different places at different times. Am I right? Like how long does it take the elderberry beer to sit?
Well, it takes a week to ferment and a week to cure.
Okay.
Well, that's not bad. Mead takes forever. Mead takes
Okay.
months.
Yeah, I was thinking of like mead is almost like the standard beer.
It takes a long time. But anyway, this doesn't take a long time. But here's the thing, though. I got that book on for my birthday, and with that book, I'll have to show you the cover, came Teresa's new CD, Blessings of the Road.
Who doesn't own it
Oh
already?
yeah,
Like you, yeah, losers. If you can't show your own, if
that's
you're
right.
listening and you can't do what Michael and I are doing, then
That's
you're
right.
a loser.
Yeah, that's right.
Loser. Yep.
And we're going to talk a lot about this today because it is a beautiful record. And
So beautiful.
I think I have to tell my tree story again because it's a good one. So, and actually, as I was reading the notes here, and Mickey Houlihan, who is the engineer on this record, was also the engineer on the record that first introduced me to Therese 30 years ago or more, maybe 35,
Really?
which is Rosa Mystica. And what happened is, even to this day, Bonnie likes to listen to music while she's cooking. It's been, it's her thing. And so this is 35 years ago, or 30 or 35. I think we had some kids already, so it was less than 35. And she got, I think it was a Celestial Harmonies or somebody compilation CD. They had a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And she was listening to it, and I was kind of half listening to it, whatever I was doing. And then this one track came on, and I got up and I go in the next room. Who is that? And it was Therese. And it was her song Rosa Mystica from Rosa Mystica. And so what's the next thing you do? You get the whole album, which is what I did. And so it was beautiful. I mean, it was kind of one of those moments, right? And then maybe 20 years later, almost maybe more than 20 years later, after the submerged reality came out.
That elderberry wine is a little more potent
I'll
than you
tell
think.
you what, yeah. I've taken to the drink. I have, Mike. That my friend Jim Wetmore, who's one of the publishers at Angelico Press, called me up one day, and he was at a conference. Said, "Hey, what are you doing?" "I'm at a conference." "Hey, I just talked to Therese Schroeder-Sheker." Said, "Oh, cool." And I thought I was just assuming she was at the conference. So I said, "Well, tell her I said hello. Tell her I'm a big fan, longtime fan." And he said, "No, she's not here. She emailed me and I called her that way, but she wants to get in contact with you." I said, "Well, absolutely get her in contact with me." So I'm like, oh, 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 oh. What do you do when you're a big fan and you meet somebody? And look at her. And it was so wonderful. And then it had to be 2016. I think it was right before the conference, Mike, because
Okay.
I think Therese saw something about the conference, which is where I met you and
Yeah.
how I met you.
Yeah.
And how we can say eventually this podcast began because of that.
Sure. It all's
Yeah.
connected.
And
Jesus, the
Imagination
Imagination.
began
Yeah.
because of that. And Therese was going to come in, but she had a previous engagement that she couldn't make it. But I said, we'll find another time. And since that time, ladies and gentlemen, Therese has become one of my BFFs, my best friends forever.
You're stuck with me now, bub.
That's right. I'm stuck. Well, but we're like kin, right?
I wanted to say, first of all, greetings, my brothers in subversivity.
All right. Yeah.
Greetings, my brothers. We got Mike and Michael
And it works.
and Mickey Houlihan. I mean, like, my life is completely surrounded in Michaelic kind of energy. and I want to say something, Mickey Houlihan, you referred to him as the engineer, but he's like the midwife. He's the soul of things, because when you're working with Mickey, nothing boils down to technology. He's got the soul of, he keeps everything on track with artistry and soul.
Yeah.
And if something about what you're doing or how you're playing or something on a given day is just click track and boring and mechanical, he will let you know this is not beautiful. So
Wow.
Anyway, he's a lifelong comrade. And I have to say, many, many years ago, I mean, decades ago, I realized one thing about Mickey. I thought, God, if I ever have to jump off the side of a mountain and I know I'm going to go splat, this is the end. Mickey's one of the ones I would jump off the side of the mountain with, so.
Wow.
So my respect for him is enormous. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, and go ahead.
His record company is called Curve Blue. So it's Curve Blue.
Oh, that's his record. Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Well, how's the first word spelled? Curb Blue?
Curb Blue.
Curve.
Right,
Curve
Blue.
Okay, Curve Blue. Gotcha. Yeah.
Curve Blue.
Yeah.
Now, at least my awareness of this project probably goes back a couple years, when Therese told me that Mickey had unearthed some recordings they had done, who knows when. And she sent me one of the tracks, and it's one of the tracks in here, I'm pretty sure. And it's one of the a cappella pieces. I can't remember which one it was that you sent me, but they're both Adoro Te Devote. Is that the one?
Adoro Te Devote, or also the Kyrie.
Kyrie. but it was
Okay.
gorgeous. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you recorded that in the church, right?
Well, we recorded those in the chapel at Snowmass. So
Where's Snowmass? Is that in Colorado?
Colorado. I have a
in
coffee
Colorado.
table book of it, and it deserves to have a coffee table book of it because from every vantage point, everything you look at is so stunningly beautiful.
So beautiful and um, in keeping with the highest Cistercian ideal, nothing to distract you, nothing to get hooked on. So open space, the quality of light, everything about it was so beautiful. So, but I had been doing my retreats there at Snowmass for quite a while,
Oh,
and I got and I knew the monastic community, and had been very, very warmly received by. I had real friendships with several of the priest monks, and had very warm relationship with the abbot, and so Mickey said, Therese, how do you feel about recording there? I could load up a van. In the old days, it was much more equipment than is needed now.
yeah.
Much more
Oh
equipment.
my gosh. Didn't even
So,
imagine.
Mickey loaded up the whole world, and the abbot gave us permission, and we spent several days there. So, and actually, life went on, and I think we both somehow lost track of the fact that Mickey had all these beautiful recordings. So it was exciting when he found it.
Wild. And Michael,
Yeah.
Snowmass is it's kind of understood. So a Thomas Keating, that name, who blurbed the back of Meditations of the Tarot,
Exactly.
a Snowmass, Basil Pennington spent a lot of time there, also blurbed the back of Meditations of the Tarot. Within the Abbey de Genesee, you could also see it as the land of misfit toys. You know, some of the guys, the Trappists from different houses that are really eclectic and eccentric. They could all, and there's wonderful eccentrics at every Cistercian monastery. But, a lot of like both Keating and Pennington, Therese would know more, but, after they were abbots, sometimes it's hard to go be a regular monk again. So you could kind of go to Snowmass. But it's a wonderful place in and of itself, but it's also a clearinghouse for kind of Trappist eccentrics in the U.S. Would you concur with that, Therese?
Well,
Or free thinkers?
in the years that I lived in Colorado, all I can tell you is it was such a joy to go there.
Yeah.
And every single one of the men whom I met was unique. Their humanity was greatly developed.
Mhm.
They were not. There was no cookie cutter or anything.
No cookie cutter.
They're absolutely unique gifts. One of my friends there, Father Paul Lelecki, he has already made his transitus too, but he was a composer and a conductor and a solid musician. Brother Father Theophane was alive back then. The abbot was Father Joseph. I just can't tell you how wonderful they were. And if I could, is it okay to tell you a little Snowmass story?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Well, I had during my touring years, whenever I toured, like I would do a many city tour, and so I would always write 2 monasteries a year and say something to the effect of, "I'm going to be within 100 miles of your monastery. Can I do anything for you?" Sort of thing. And so I contacted Snowmass, and they said, "Oh, please, would you do a concert here?" Yes, I'd love to. And I had done one at St. Joseph's in Spencer
Okay.
years
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
and that was where I met Father Basil Pennington. So anyway, so I'm there. I do the best that I can. I do my little concert, and then I'm really aware at that particular time there were no guests in the guest house, so I was the only female on all those many acres, and I thought, okay, finish up, pack up the harps, remove yourself as quickly as possible, and let the men be off on their own. And I felt a little bit nervous. It takes quite a while to take all the microphones down and pack up 7 harps and 3 psalteries and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, one of the men came out, one of the brothers, a priest, came out and said, "The abbot would like to know if you'd like to join us for dinner." Well,
Whoa.
I was thrilled. And I just assumed that, I don't know, I'd meet in some place where the public goes, "No, no, no, no. We'll just lock this up, leave everything here. You're coming behind." And so I went into the cloister with them. And I couldn't believe it. I was honored and moved. And so they served a wonderful, simple dinner. And then they began talking. And they said, when you sang the Adoro Te Devote, and they would get tears in their eyes because, of course, since Vatican II, they had, with their vow of obedience, they had stopped singing the Latin chant. And somehow it opened up the floodgates, and these beautiful, beautiful, loving men kind of went through something like greatest hits, the greatest love affairs they had with all their Gregorian chants.
Yeah.
"Oh, geez, do you remember blah, blah, blah? Do you remember blah, blah, blah?" And they, "Oh, will you sing it for us?" And they were all sitting there. And so then I see one priest is looking across the table at Father Abbot, and I see some little signals going with the eyes, and Father Abbot nods his head yes. And so he disappears, and he comes back with some libations or something. So we all pour a little bit with our dinner, and the men keep on telling me their favorite stories about how much they love this chant or how much they love that chant. And then I see Father Abbot give the same priest another look, and he disappears. And he comes back into the room. There was much joy, so much sweetness between all of us. And I felt really honored. And they came back and they made a gift of one of those massive 40-pound tomes. It's in another building. It never occurred to me to get it out to show you, but it's a 40-pound volume that is 1/4 of the year, 1/4 of the liturgical year.
Wow.
And the abbot gave it to me as a gift from the monastery, with the special note saying, "We hope that you will pass on our tradition to your students."
Oh, wonderful.
And so then every student I ever had then for the next 30 years always saw that book.
Well, that's wild.
This reminds me, something happened to me yesterday, and I think this speaks not only to that experience at with the monks, but also to kind of the theme of the album, right? The transitus and the leave taking.
The leave taking,
right?
blessings.
The blessings of the road, right? And so yesterday I was surprised. So even though it was Midsummer's Eve, right? Or St. John's Eve, Bonnie and I were talking about, and she didn't remember it, but I remember it, at least watching it on television, production of Twelfth Night that had Paul Rudd as Orsino and Helen Hunt as Viola. And I said, "Do you remember seeing that?" 'Cause when we were watching it, and I thought my daughter May was a baby when it happened. So she was born in 97. So, and I looked it up, and of course it was 98 that it came out. So she was a baby. And I found it online. And I just wanted to see a little bit of it because I wanted to see if the way I remembered it measured up to to what it really is. And what struck me, and I teared up. And even though most of them are American actors, and as one of my Shakespeare professors would say when you'd go to see a production with American actors, and I'd say, "How was it?" He goes, "Well, it was the typical American performance of Shakespeare." What do you mean by that? "Well, they can't really say the lines, so they screamed them." But it struck me, though, they had a couple English actors in there. Paul Rudd's half English, but the beauty of the language, and I've been teaching Shakespeare forever, but the beauty of the language struck me in a melancholic way as something that's disappearing or that's in danger of disappearing from Western culture.
Yeah.
And I teared up. And I teared up like, so we can't lose this, but we are losing it,
Yeah.
and it's
There's so
unfortunate.
many things we're losing right now.
Well, yeah, I
So
know.
many
And
things,
that's and what the monks were expressing to Therese way back in the day is precisely that.
Yeah.
It's precisely and the album itself, I mean, and I don't want to give the impression to our listeners and viewers that it's not depressing. I mean, it's beautiful. As in, and Teresa, a lot of you might not know, has been for 40 years or more, right? We're running the Chalice of Repose project.
Oh,
With
50. 50.
50.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Only 50. Yeah.
Wow.
And
I earned every one of these white hairs. Yeah.
which is, I mean, if you we'll link it in the show description. And then combined with Teresa's musical career, she has a parallel career as a clinician and someone who works with the dying and using music as a way to aid the dying. And it's beautiful. And I actually, speaking of melancholy, so right before we got on, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I need to live. I hope we all live long enough so I can hear Therese play the harp when I'm near her, because I haven't heard that yet.
Mm.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Get in the car, Therese. Get in the car.
Yeah, that's right. So
Start driving to.
you
Michael
can probably
said
make
that
it by dinner time Thursday.
Michael said that he might be coming out to the West Coast. So
Oh
I
wow!
said,
Right, yeah.
come on, drive on down. Yeah.
Come
Well,
on down.
I wanted to say something. Yeah, everything about leave taking, it the work that we've been doing clinically has to do with aiding people at the end of life, but this is not an occasion for hair shirts.
Right.
Sometimes it's the deepening the deepest possible aspects of our humanity, to accompany one another and to be there for one another, especially in the 20th century and the 21st century, late practice of biomedicine, which is largely a technological delivery of medicine. After World War II, largely technological delivery. And so for a human being to be there to serve another human being, the person is in the bed and you're there with the harp 3 feet away, and it's an hour of enormous intimacy. It's not about sadness or weeping or gnashing of teeth or anything.
Right.
And it's about helping someone deepen their own relationship to their own process as opposed to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And this recording, Blessings of the Road, is very, very different from all the other records and recordings, vinyl, old-fashioned vinyl, then CD, all kinds of things that I've done. Those were all very different because I highlighted many different kinds of repertoire: French, German, Welsh, you name it. This is very different because I just attempted to give something about the spirit of what prescriptive music might be. So it's very naked music.
Yes.
There's nothing to hide behind. There's no big production. It's very, very lyrical and naked. And I mean spiritually and emotionally naked. You
Right.
don't hide behind any tricks. And also, the relationship to silence is part of every phrase, and you want to have breathing cadences because that's how we are in real life. We don't speak like, well, I know Eminem does when he raps, but we don't speak like, you know, we we have a cadence, and it's that beauty of language.
Mhm.
But also there's the beauty of phrasing, even in instrumental music, letting something breathe before you begin the next phrase again. And I think that due to Mickey's soulfulness, his artistry, he was able to help catch all that and get that kind of a recording.
Yep.
So, uh, and so in many ways, I'm really aware that this recording, Blessings of the Road, of course, is our great wish for anybody at any time. Leave taking, I think everything about our leave taking, oh, something about the way we either enter a situation or something about the way we leave a situation speaks greatly to um, character or who we are essentially. And so the ability to simply get in the hospital room and serve the person as they're really and truly breathing, the respiratory cycles, to serve them is very, very different from giving a concert on stage. Very, very different.
Mhm.
So you become invisible. If you your best possible work, you become totally invisible. People don't even remember that you're there. You're just playing, and you pretty much become synonymous with the wall. And then, so it has something much more to do with service rather than technique. Um, and so anyway, somehow this particular recording is also a great opportunity for a great deal of gratitude.
Mhm.
I
And,
bent
and
over backwards to say thank you to so many people.
Mhm.
and it feels that way. It really does feel that way when I listen to it.
I'm
And
so
I'm
glad.
glad you mentioned the you compared it to the kinds of rest we have in conversation, right? Or the silences.
Oh
One
yeah.
of the best lessons I ever had as a young musician when I was, I don't know, 20 or 21, my manager used to take me around to meet all the old Motown people in Detroit. And they always had advice. And this one guy, I can't, it was Mr. Beans, a saxophone player, plays on all the great all the great Motown tracks. And he was a really tall guy. He was probably 6'5". And he said, all gray hair, black gentleman. And he said, let me tell you something, young man. Music is like a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you talk fast, sometimes you talk slow. You got to listen to the other person, and sometimes you don't talk at all.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
no, that really was a great lesson because that one stuck with me. But
Yeah.
and I think what's interesting in the record is I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's like a dialogue, and you mention here, in fact, we have to mention uh, Therese is making liner notes great again.
Yeah, like Tony
You know
Okay
what
and
I
a few
mean?
other artists used to do it. Liner
Remember when you were a
notes. It's
kid and you
lost
would sit
art.
there
Yeah.
and just look, reading all the notes and all
Yeah.
everything.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I love
That's
it.
that's that's very dear. For me, the writing of the program notes is as important as the making of the music. Uh, to me, silence, then the thinking of words, then the spoken word, written word, sung word,
Mhm,
played music. It's all a continuum.
mhm.
They're not separate things, and so um, it was very transformative to write those particular program notes because there were several bumps along the way where we were trying to do this during COVID, and you name it, all kinds of things happened. So thank you for bringing that up. It is really funny though. I've heard people have very different perspective. We're of the age group, all three of us, even though I think I'm quite a bit older than both of you two gentlemen,
Oh, don't be so sure.
my friends in subversivity. Um, um, one of the things is that when we were young, we devoured the program notes, whether it was classical music, folk music, jazz. It didn't matter what we were listening to. Those reading the program notes was as important as listening to the music. And
Absolutely.
all of that has disappeared with the advent of streaming.
Mm-hmm.
And also with streaming, most situations allow you to completely destroy the architecture of the journey. So if you think you've fallen in love with Mahler or Bach, you don't have to buy the whole record. You just buy the one aria that you like and dump the rest, or one movement of the Mahler, and it's like no, 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 no. And so that's one of the other things that happens with streaming. Everything is treats the recording as though it's
It's not part of a context.
not part of an entire process,
Yeah.
not part of a journey, and all this business about do I like this or do I not like it? It like a snap listening, and you just buy this, buy that, and so this CD harkens back to a certain kind of older time
Well,
when and
it's holistic. I mean, it looks at it, it's a whole, right?
yeah,
It's not a piece, it's a whole. And I
yeah,
think what I was going with talking about the notes, I mean, one of the things you mentioned the notes, and you and I have talked about this many times over the last several years, is you lost many friends over the course of COVID, not to COVID, but you know, just as their time to go. And there was a beautiful way you put it. Of course, now I won't be able to find it, but I just had it right here.
It's early on in the essay,
Um,
isn't it?
no.
No, okay.
well, yeah, they didn't die of COVID. It was all the things people used to die
Yeah,
of, the
right.
heart attacks, the strokes, the cancers. And speaking of which, while we were preparing this recording, our dear cellist, the beautiful cellist, David Darling, such an honor to record with him and to play with him. But he made his transitus exactly, uh, Michael reminded me, 2 years ago today.
Right.
And so, uh, these things pierce your heart, and yet you imagine him being just as lyrical as he moves through the spheres, sort of being able to be surrounded in the music of the spheres, because to this day I know no one who's able to improvise uh, um, on cello the way David did.
Those
And
were
plus,
improvisations.
um, yes, he would listen.
Whoa.
He would listen to me and then risk. And also, we could have done one more thing, but we didn't. On this particular recording, David only plays cello, but David's singing voice is actually more beautiful than mine.
Hmm.
He had an
Really?
oh gosh, yes, he had a very lyrical voice, very high voice, clear, unadulterated, transparent voice, and it kind of a voice of an angel, which he was a man's man. He was a real manly guy. So he was an artist's artist.
And I think that it's two pieces that you play together, right? On the record.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
both of them, it really, I mean, for me, and I have a little experience with playing music, but you can really hear, going back to this idea of conversation or dialogue, it's a spiritual dialogue, and
Yeah,
it's
it really
extraordinary.
is. It
Yeah.
really is.
And
Yeah.
and for me, it's it's a kind of spirit, and I think that's what I love about this record is it's it tells a story, and one of the pieces also is Nora's Crown, the piece you wrote for your mother after her death,
Oh, yeah.
which is beautiful. But and all of those, and I was just listening to it again before, so I get into the zone before we started talking, and I was like, wow, this is a dialogue with the dead in a beautiful way.
In a beautiful way.
Like
Yeah.
like it
Yeah.
actually in this room, which is where my mother died almost 2 years ago. Um, right over there. It was a beautiful passing because all of us were here, or almost all of us were here, including all the grandkids, and it's a lot of grandkids. But after she passed, one of the things, you enter in dialogue, and I read her the Gospel of St. John, and that's important. And those are things like Therese was saying, the modern delivery system for music is you get pieces. You don't get the whole. You get a movement of Bach. You don't get the whole concerto, right? Which is dumb. And our experience of death is the same thing, which is what I think,
Well, it's
we tend to think
corporatized.
of. Yeah, it's
It's
corporatized, and it's
corporatized, medicalized, um,
it's
billables like
desensitized.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So the whole idea of restoring intimacy. So at the start of life, when a mother's giving birth, you don't get anything more intimate than that. And at the end of life, so our goal had to do with beauty, intimacy, and reverence.
that's right.
Well
Now,
done.
ladies and gentlemen, podcast listeners of all ages, Teresa's not a tattoo person, but she got a tattoo. I know it would say "knee woman,"
Oh,
because that's what she's describing right here. And she's written some essays for Jesus the Imagination. I know she's working on a book on this because this is what Teresa is. She's the knee woman.
Mhm.
And why don't you explain what that is, Teresa?
well, I don't remember when this happened, but one time we were on the telephone, and Mike Sauter, you said, and Therese, your whole knee woman project. And I thought, he's the first person who noticed. Yeah. So knee woman is the old Scottish Hebridean term for a midwife. So they're thinking the birthing. However, the Hebridean Islands, there might be as many as 100 islands off that, what's that word? Archipelago?
Archipelago, yeah.
Archipelago. And so people all know the names of 7 or 8 or 9 of the islands, but they don't know the rest of them. And many of the islands were, it was literally impossible for priests to come from the mainland and cross the seas. A lot of times the seas were too wild. And so there were islands where a priest wouldn't come for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. And so the midwife's role began being not only medical to help with the birthing process, but also sacramental. She began baptizing babies right there at the bedside.
Mm-hmm.
And then if a priest wound up being able to come on a boat later, that year, next year, 2 years later,
Mm-hmm.
that would be well and good. He might do a second baptism, but the knee woman did the first baptism. And I think very much of our end of life work with music is also a kind of protection and greeting. It's that kind of intimacy. It is the leave taking, but I think of it as a birth. We may be leaving here, but a birth into the transformed life.
Mhm.
So I see midwife at the end of life, midwife in the beginning of life. To me, they are the
Looking
same.
at it. Yeah.
They're the same.
Let me ask you, you had mentioned a couple minutes ago, that the ministry of like music thanatology was connecting to helping people kind of connect with their process,
Yeah.
right? Could you, so you're with an individual, for our listeners too, like, could you unpack that a little bit, in their process? Is it people not allowing themselves to go into the journey? Anything you,
Yeah.
this is
Thank
a
you.
great mystery. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Let me think for a moment. So a lot of things are going on. Let's just take a couple different examples. They'll be hypothetical. So maybe a woman is dying and she has 3 children. Maybe she's got a virulent cancer. She's definitely going. Sometimes there's so much pressure from the people who love her. Mom, one more round of chemo, one more round of radiation. Mom, what about a stem cell? So sometimes there are outside voices that want the dying person to do what they want, which is the opposite of the fact that this dying person is in fact literally unbinding from life. So that's an example where the outside voices or
Yeah.
the outside forces might be something else. Another kind is when even the doctor might, or the, we use the language, the providers might really believe that you could make it if you just had one more round, had one more round. But you might turn and say, this may be true for you, but I can't do it again. So I've made my peace and I'm ready to go. I really feel like I've completed my life. So sometimes your actual process of unbinding and what others around you want you to do can be 2 different stories. So helping somebody access their own depth is not a talk therapy. It's we first of all, we enter the room, we're with the person who's dying very quietly for several minutes. We're working clinically, we're paying attention to heartbeat and breath and respiration and respiratory cycles and pulse and all the rest of it. And in many cases, but not always, sometimes they're hooked up to the monitors so you see the dynamism right in front of you on the screen. But even when they're not hooked up to machinery, sometimes the person is still on a breathing apparatus, you know. So anyway, you relate to their physicality. But one of the first things you do is you enter the room and you're there in silence. And you begin to try and phrase, you're working with their breathing patterns, not yours. So it's my job to play the music not at the tempo that might be sung, or if you were on stage performing, or if you were at a liturgy and you heard the Adoro Te Devote, but in fact to go with the pace with which you're breathing. So first of all, I synchronize with your breathing, your heartbeat and pulse, and play with you, support you, and then slowly, imperceptibly, slow down. Help you access. Very often, most of the time when we're doing really good work, the nurses always tell us, John, Mary, whoever it was for whom we were playing, they didn't need any opioids for 6 hours after you played. This has not happened. They didn't need anything to the next. So-and-so slept more deeply after this than they have slept in weeks. So you have a lot of physical responsivity. And so we're not doing a talk therapy. Everything about what we're doing is phrasing and being with them in a kind of trusting intimacy, but we're articulating the audible sounds with the rise and fall of your chest. And so you've got to have a lot of skills to be able to, everything that you're doing is entirely memorized and your eyes are on the patient the whole time. You're not looking at a score, you're not looking at your fingers. So you've got to be able to, when we say, is the music embodied? It really and truly must be so embodied that it's very, very free. Very free. And then you have to be willing to be able to play a piece 7, 8, 10, 15 times. So And on this recording, Blessings of the Road, we risk, I think, some of the pieces we played 7 or 8 times to give people an idea that this is not spliced together. Every single time you come back around and you play it again, you make something a little bit differently, make it unique, a little bit different. Now, people who love folk music have been doing that forever, but this is a way of deepening, expanding the dimensions of height and depth and width and so forth. And again, no talk therapy, no talk therapy at all. We're just letting the person breathe. That's all, just letting them breathe. And oftentimes, if we do really good work, they will fall into a very deep sleep when we are there playing.
Yeah, I bet.
And that's a great positive. That's not a negative.
Yeah. No, I thank you for clarifying that. Like I had a sense, but until you mentioned it, you know, the idea of and I've known so many, that notion that we see, you know, again, Illich would say, there's this moment when you know the angel of death has entered the room, right?
Absolutely.
And when we've medicalized death, we've trained people to miss those moments. And I'm sure with your work in music thanatology, there's many such moments that are natural. And we've educated ourselves out of any relationship with that part of nature.
Yeah. Well, we outsource it all, right?
Yeah, right.
We don't, we have somebody else deal with it.
Well, we validate that which can be weighed, measured, counted.
Yeah.
That we validate the metrics with this zeitgeist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As if we still pretend that attempts to be more objective.
And what I love about what you do in your clinical work and what you do in this album and all your albums is it's an attention to the real,
To the
which
real.
means it's sociological.
To the
Right?
real.
It's absolutely
Right,
sociological.
right.
Thank
Right.
you. Thank you. So, I use all 3 words: body, soul, spirit. And so I'd been doing the work for a long time when first theologians began coming up to me and saying, Therese, how long have you studied theology? And I looked and I just studied liturgical documents. And they said, oh no, what you're doing is pastoral theology. What you're doing is pastoral theology. You're more pastoral than we are. But they were saying that out of kindness.
Yeah.
They were saying, we know all the documents. We're experts in the documents, and we can teach certain dogmas and doctrines, but you're there with them. And so we adopted the monastic language of doing the deathbed vigil. So my indebtedness to monasticism is just immeasurable.
It is so funny. That's great. One thing of when you talked about monasticism and Snowmass, and I think I've maybe said it once on this show, but I heard myself saying it so much to college students, is that even though monasticism and our beloved Cistercian order could be going through a death here in the United States, just like Snowmass, the people need to know that there's more diversity inside a Catholic Trappist monastery than there is in the city of New York, in one sense.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah, because we all self-select out in the world. We self-select. It's certainly true in big cities. But in most other places, we self-select people who are kind of like us. And you can't run from your neighbor in the monastery by definition. So you end up negotiating with that person that, just like when they say most of politics is temperamental, we're not aware of just how the young language of vibes, I'm vibing with this. We just avoid people who are temperamentally different from us or everything like that. But in the monastery, even if they try to stay away, and they're human, so they tried to stay away from others that annoyed the living crap out of them, but they still had to deal with them much more than I have to deal with people who really, really, really annoy me. And so consequently, there's a high percentage of men in monasteries who are what a major theme of this podcast, mature. They're mature, they're grown-ups. And women are saying at college, they're already women, there's something about them, but they recognize at universities across the country and earlier that they haven't met a grown-up yet, and they probably never will, a grown-up man. And again, men don't know what women are talking about when they say that. And so then they settle. And the one advice I would want to give my daughters for marriage is don't settle. But we're having a culture that most women are settling because they're not meeting grown-ups. But a monastery, something about that life we have to learn is it seems to turn boys into men. And it's not the Lion King, a rite of passage where we have to send them out to the woods, though that's part of it, right? They're not just chopping wood, they're learning forestry. So they're dealing with the real. They're not eating bacon, they're raising pigs. I've mentioned this stuff before. But but consequently what it leads to are kind of individuals, and that's a huge takeaway for me from being in a monastery.
Well, and the historical relationship that the Cistercians had actually from the very beginning to farming is something I would love to come back to. For them, the balance between prayer and manual labor. I'm sorry, when you're clearing bogs and chopping wood and doing all these incredible, shearing the sheep and the rest of it, it's really hard work. Now, I want to say something. Neither of you have been here to my place. I have a very tiny
Haven't
little.
been invited. Just kidding.
Oh, please come! Please come!
I know. You're the most hospitable person we've ever met.
Please come. But so I once, twice in my life, I've had the great privilege and blessing of living on very large places. Once a 20-acre place, another time an 80-acre place. Where I live now and where I've lived for the past 22 years, less than 1/4 of 1 acre.
Okay.
But I have such a garden you can't believe. I have such a cultivated garden, but it is really and truly a garden. It is not a farm. I have no animals the way Michael does. I'm not raising goats or chickens or geese or any of the rest of it. But the poet Sharon Murphin came and visited me a few weeks ago, and Sharon is a beautiful poet who's also been published in Jesus, the Imagination, and she's a music.
The editor is with us right now, fans.
And Sharon came and visited, and she's preparing a series of. She's got a whole series of poetry books coming out. Anyway, she turned to me at the end of our visit. She stood at the front door and she said, "Oh, Therese, and I love your." Excuse me. She didn't cough. She said, "Therese, I love your farm." And I was so touched. I didn't argue with her the point. No, honey, a farm has to have an animal organism. I didn't go there. I avoided that, deanly hit. And I said, "Oh, thank you," because that was the greatest compliment.
It is a nice compliment
that she could have given me. She went out and looked at everything, and she realized every single solitary day it's just me by myself, and I have to do all of it. My humanity is deepened and enriched because of this. Because there were days during our careers where we were on the computers so much. And certainly when you're working in a hospital, the documentation requirements, and when you're in academia, the documentation requirements of the teaching load, they're just gigantic. So they still exist, but I'm at a stage in my life where I can, what's the word I want? Organize, structure my workday the way I want. So I have a great blessing from my board of directors at the Child Suffer Post Project to do hard manual labor, garden. I'm outside by 5:15 in the morning. I'm working really hard. I work until about 10:30 because I have no capacity for the high sun. And I being Irish, I turn lobster red. I come in and get cleaned up, and then I begin all my inner work, or the work with harp, or teaching, or the rest of it. But being out there every single day. I'm sure, Michael, you can relate to this, but I owe that vision to the Cistercians.
Yeah. I would like to think I took them for granted, but they were, I think we're all kind of influenced by the first monastery we see, or just religious order. So people who go to this really wonderful place, Mount Irenaeus, the OFMs, the Franciscans run it. But my
Sure.
first monastery, because it was in my parish, was Trappist. So it's just my jam, and then I didn't know other. It was the only one I knew. Then I started running the retreat house. I'd been to Mount Savior, which is a Benedictine monastery. But that balance is certainly it. And the simplicity in life. Baking, when young guys would come to the Abbey of the Genesee, right now the age is so high that very few of the guys are laboring. It's a fact. Probably 70% are just in the infirmary. And the remaining guys are probably infirmarians. There is a forester, and some do yard work, but they even kind of gave up. They had to, some of their communal work in the bakery. But the bakery was going to be different than work in nature.
Right.
And some
Right.
of the young guys, if they were looking at the Abbey of the Genesee, and it could develop at any point, they want to see themselves farming some of these 2,000 acres. But it's tricky. It's tricky.
Oh,
yeah,
it's really tricky. Yeah, it's
uh,
really tricky.
an important place actually for me as a child, and then when I met Bonnie, and when before I met Bonnie, is there was it's no longer there, unfortunately. There was a Franciscan monastery in Southfield, Michigan. It was probably on 100 acres of undeveloped land, and they had the most beautiful orchard and beautiful gardens. And then I discovered later, so I was only 18 when I first discovered this, or even younger. My parents brought me there to see what a beautiful church it was. But I discovered later that these beautiful gardens had been taken over by Alan York and the Waldorf Teacher Development
Yeah.
Association,
Oh,
who they were renting space from the monks. And it was beautiful. And I used to go there every day. And I found out years later that these were all my friends were there learning how to be Waldorf teachers.
yeah, yeah.
I
That's
must,
so
I
cool.
just felt it. That's what you guys just soaked in.
Well, and I should say, just to be fair, it was mom. It was my mother who. I grew up in Chicago near a Carmelite monastery,
Okay. Yeah.
and it was mom brought me to Carmel first. But I grew up hearing about Saint Francis. So my mother was a member of the Third Order Saint Francis. I thought the whole world was Franciscan. She brought me to the Carmelites. I was deeply moved by the Carmelites, but the cloister there, that's very powerful to a young woman. And
Yeah.
I saw that they were really beautiful and spirited women. They were not little
Yeah.
mousy, thing. And but then as an adult, I had moved to um, Colorado, and that was where I encountered the Cistercians up close.
Yeah.
And I was able to go there, during the solemnities, Easter, Christmas, and the rest of it.
Yeah.
And when you get to go to someplace many times over the years, then something else really happens.
Yeah.
So I can see that it's just part of my gratitude for this kind of vision has nothing to do with an institutional nostalgia. It
Yeah.
has to do with the fact that I met mature men,
Mature
mature
men.
women,
Yep. 100%.
creative artists, scientists,
They
doctors.
know where they begin and other people end, or they know where they end and other people begin. They can use their hands to a certain degree. They can take notice of the real and have a conversation about the flower in front of them. They don't
That's right.
always see the idea first. They're not so easily reduced to ideology. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're living it. Yeah, I'm thinking, uh, Mike. It was from you that I learned about the priest writer Jean Sullivan.
Yeah. I'm so glad you read them.
Well, he's really changed my life. I'm so grateful to
He's
you
great.
for that.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about that book that you wrote called Morning Light.
Yeah.
And there's this, I mean,
It's a masterpiece.
every page is underlined.
Yeah.
But he had this beautiful little thing. He said, "Our roots follow us.
Hmm.
Our roots follow us." And so I think a really mature spirituality is an enormous comes at an enormous cost because you don't cut yourself off from your roots. You must develop self-knowledge. and and that again is part of our gratitude. You don't do reaction spirituality by surgically removing something that you want to walk away from. You've got to transform it. And
Yeah.
I learned about real transformation of our heartbreaks, our losses, our everything.
Yeah. I
From
think I learned that from the Trappist too, and I probably didn't realize it. Like I'm always quoting the young people, this podcast, they're so bored. The only way out is through. That's young people are saying it now, and I'm so happy for them. But I probably first learned it through a Trappist who was just sitting still. I'm like, what are you doing? And he
right,
wasn't, and he was
right,
processing something in his gut. And
right.
for all I know, he could have been a Martian. He could have been, I just had no idea. He was sitting with something, you know,
Well,
he was sitting with something. I
and
didn't know that.
you're called to go all the way through something.
All the way through something.
Your
Yeah.
birth, your death, your marriage, your friendship, your whatever, all the way through. Don't drug yourself. Don't surgically remove it. All the way through. And that's what I've always been calling the luminous wound. We've got to do the transformation work. It's a much deeper level of metanoia and a kenotic voluntary self-emptying,
Yeah.
that allows us to experience and meet the real, which is what you guys are talking about.
What's the best book? Quick question. What's the best book on the totality of grief? So you're into music thanatology, but like when I was at St. Bernard studying, the trendy subjects were just Kubler-Ross, right? Women's priesthood and Kubler-Ross on the 5 stages. But where do you go? But it's an undeveloped ministry in most parishes, and people are really struggling with grief. And I think our world isn't helping people.
Yeah.
Where do you direct people to? And Michael, your opinion too. Like who's got some of the best work that can help people understand the totality, so you don't box yourself in, things like that.
Oh, thank you. I've gone blank. I can see it. The cover is black. Exquisite British doctor. I would say I really respect the suffering that Kubler-Ross went through. And she really did suffer a lot. But the one whose book means the most to me, there was a doctor whose name has gone blank.
Okay.
I forget what it is. After our podcast is over, I'll send you guys an
And
email.
I can put it in the link. Yeah.
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 But the big entree for me was to differentiate between pain and suffering. That's the first point of entry. And people have a tendency to glob everything together as if it's one big blob, and it isn't. So you can have on a pain scale of 1 to 10, your pain from the cancer, maybe the tumors are not pressing up on the nerve endings, or maybe you have adequate pain meds, and so your pain on a pain scale of 1 to 10 may be only a 2, but your suffering may be at a 9, because you're so disfigured that your spouse will not come and visit you anymore. They can't stand. So, for instance, there are many kinds of illnesses where the smells are very difficult, and people sometimes aren't very kind about that. You have to be able to be with the sights, the sounds, the smells. It's very, very, very tactile, physical, very, very. And so to differentiate between pain and suffering. So another thing, my pain may be very modest and my suffering may be very modest or very low. And this allows me to deepen into my own process and to help the unbinding process happen really naturally, as opposed to with opiates. So I would like to make a suggestion. maybe you guys would invite me back to do a second podcast, and we could just do one on music thanatology.
Yeah, yeah,
I would love to do something
yeah.
like that.
Count on
Um, yeah, and I'm sorry I've gone blank. I can see the book. I even know what shelf it's
that. Oh,
on.
it's fine. We'll put it in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
notes at the bottom. Interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So pain and suffering, differentiate between those two. And
And that's for the people who are going to experience their own mortality, but also for the people grieving their loss. That distinction can still be helpful.
And that's what
absolutely, absolutely. And could I just remind everybody, I spent a lot of years of my life reading monastic customaries, and one of the great things, a great contribution of monastic medicine, is that they describe care of the body, cure of the soul, and second of all, they describe they're great proponents of this business. We may be leaving the form of this life here. My biography this time is coming to an end. I am leaving, but I'm being born on another level. And we use the Latin language, the dies natalis. It's my birthday on another level.
Yeah.
And so um, um, I would say, I hope this doesn't sound too crazy or hokey for all your listeners, but one of the great gifts of the Christian mystery is that for us, death is not an end. But I have to say, for my most serious Buddhist friends, death is not an end either. We're using different language, and we may be coming to different perceptions. But what we call the biological medical death at the end of this biography is not an end. It's only a transformation. And so I think that we can keep the relationship even if I die tomorrow. You guys could keep your relationship with me, and I can keep my relationship with you, because what does our scripture say? Love is stronger than death.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
that comes across every note on this album.
Oh,
It
thank
really
you.
does. It really does. And it ends, speaking of with the pain antiphon, right? The
Oh
portrait.
yeah. Yeah.
Which is I actually when before we started, I listened to the whole album. I listened to that one another time. I had to sit with it a little bit longer.
I think the pain antiphon is one of the most profound things. It's a handful of notes.
Yeah.
The actual antiphon in the Liber Usualis is this long, tiny, tiny, tiny. And I approach it with great care because it uses the words to which people have, how can I say this, Michael? Extremely strong negative reactions.
Right.
They associate words like hell
Yeah.
with punitive judgment and all that. But I relate it to fire, a fire process. Every fire process warms, melts, liquefies, changes, transforms the form in which I function. So the more in a monastic customary, the pain antiphon was reserved for someone who is suffering fever, a febrile condition.
Yeah.
So you got your
Burning up.
nasty fever, 103, 104, you're suffering physically enormously. And you play that pain antiphon over and over and over and over. You could play it 20 times. Someone's softening, the melting, the lyricism. That's when the nurses would come back to us and say, "We don't understand it." Sound asleep, and then they'd come and they'd chart. They would chart. So and so did not need opioids for 6 hours, 8 hours, not until the next day. So something can happen, and it has to do with claiming your own process, inhabiting your own process, but you need people around who would honor and protect that. And most of the time, when you have a corporatized death, you're not allowed to do that, you know.
Wild stuff. It's wild stuff. And so you're
Yeah.
saying the opioids, in their own way, they can relieve from physical pain, but by also kind of numbing you to the suffering, it's numbing you to the process. Is that somewhat right,
Yeah.
Therese?
No, sometimes, no, sometimes you simply couldn't make it without a little bit of help.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to taking some pain meds at
Sure,
all.
sure.
I
Yeah.
think it's a matter of great compassion. However, we've all known somebody who was, how can I say this? It's possible to drink yourself, have a lot of booze in order
Self-medicating. Yeah.
to avoid meeting something
Sure,
that's
sure.
painful in
Yep,
your
yep,
life.
yeah.
It could just as well be eating chocolate, sweets, booze, wine,
Mhm.
vodka. It doesn't matter. Or opioids. You could get a prescription from your doctor so you don't have to confront the reality of an amputation, a mastectomy, this,
Yeah.
that, or the other. And you just want to be numbed, but that's not the same thing as going through something.
Right,
So
right.
one of the wisest doctors with whom I ever had the honor of being present to him, someone I really, really love, had a terrible cancer. It was a very rare kind of cancer that for which there was no protocol. It was very difficult. And my friend asked me, Therese, will you take me to the doctor and stay with me? I would have happily driven her and then stepped outside. And she said, no, no, stay with me. Stay with me. And so the doctor was speaking with her, and he took his index finger and he went down her spine very slowly and lovingly. And then he went to the area. She had massive parts of herself were removed. And he said, there, they got the tumors, but only you can get the rage.
Hmm.
If somebody had the courage to think about that, the courage, the moral and spiritual courage this doctor had, and the way he said it was so loving. She knew, my friend knew, that that doctor loved her,
Yeah.
respected her. He was actually saying, if you want to do this, work with your anger. Work with your anger. You got to go through it. You
Yeah.
can't just drink vodka and numb yourself to it. You know, you can't just get around it. You can't surgically remove it. If you want a real process, look inside your anger, and then you're going to be whole. And that's why 800 years ago, the monks said, care of the body, cure of the soul.
Mhm.
They knew that all kinds of illnesses are never going to be able to be cured. But we can have a healing at the soul level or at the spirit level. Maybe the cancer isn't ever going away, but I could still die whole.
The difference between treating a patient and treating a disease, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that. And also realizing that every single solitary human being, even though maybe 10 of the dying patients right now have cancer, every single one is unique. They're absolutely unique, irreplaceable. They're not like one another. They're not just data. It's not just, oh, do the same 5 or 10 pieces for them. It's not like that. Each is different. You can't decide in advance of showing up what you're going to play for Michael, or what you're going to play for Mike, or what you're going to play for Michael's mom. It doesn't work like that. You have to risk. This is where Teilhard de Chardin is so beautiful to me. He describes that if you can't love without risking. You have to risk everything. And when
Or the people
you
who remind us that to fall in love is to already anticipate the death of the other or the end, right?
that, or
You're always drinking of both.
the other thing is the American way is I want to fix it. I
Yeah,
want to
right.
fix it,
The
and
problem, yeah.
you're not allowed to fix it. That's a very American response to action. But in fact, what we have to do is simply be with them and be with the process. But
How do you convince somebody that they should? So sit here listening, and I've done, body focusing, but I'm thinking of young people and still parts of myself that I could easily lose track of what I can gain from going through that extra pain. We could say maturation. We could say what some of the language you would use to say, like, I get it. I mean, I wish I could go through the pain. I don't see what's on the other side. What
yeah,
language? Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
one thing, remember, the work that we do at the bedside is not a talk therapy.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
none of us, if you're really doing music thanatology, you don't suddenly
Yeah.
cross over the border.
And forgive me, I did venture out. I was thinking where
Yeah,
like the microcosm mirrors the macrocosm, but just the everyday ordinary pains that we're encouraging people to go through. Sometimes I lose track of like why,
what I would say is this is where the formation comes in. The music thanatologist has to have an intellectual formation, a clinical formation, an emotional formation, psychological formation. They have to have a medical formation, and so as a human being preparing, if they haven't dealt with their own pain in a certain very deep way, they'll never be able to work with the dying. So it comes long before we ever get to the bedside. And this is where the very deep inner work comes from in our curriculum. And so people think, oh no, I'll just learn it. It's a technique. No, it's not a technique.
Yeah.
It's not a technique.
It's a real priesthood.
It's a very sacred work. There was a dean in the past, a dean at Harvard Divinity School named Samuel Miller, and he lamented greatly. He saw that sometimes he had divinity students who were going to go up and ask to be ordained as ministers, but they didn't go through any transformative process.
I think that's
So,
the norm now.
for example, he said they can be great scholars. So and so's superlative at their Hebrew or their Greek or their Sanskrit or their Latin, whatever, but they're lousy human beings. They lie, cheat, and steal. They're nasty. They're full of resentments. They compete. They're blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
And in a real formation, you'd be encouraged to work with that until you can transform it. And until you've begun to do that. So this dean, Samuel Miller at Harvard, he said, technique is a way of getting results without engaging the self. And he was talking about the higher self.
Yeah.
And I love that quote. So in music thanatology, I would have to say, no, it's not technique. It's this Sophianic, agapeic approach to deepening, inhabiting body, soul, spirit, intellect, thinking, feeling, willing, and then this musical artistry, and then a clinical acuity that makes for the preparatory process that makes it possible to be present, utterly present to someone else's suffering. But that brings me back full center. Today being the feast day of St. John the Baptist.
His birthday.
I love the fact that it's not the same thing. It's John the Beloved, not John the Baptist. But von Balthasar always said, he said, think of Mary and John together as a disappearing center. So they were service oriented. They weren't the superstars like Peter and Paul going out in public. And so there's something about making yourself totally invisible at the bedside.
Yeah.
That's when you're doing the great work. You're not doing work so that the nurses or the doctors will come by and go, "Oh God, that was so beautiful. That was so..." Nope. If that's what's happening, you're doing it the wrong way.
Yeah.
You've got to become totally invisible. Then you can be of service to this person.
Yeah.
This person.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they can anchor in you without using any words.
Yeah. And I think your description is so beautiful. And I was thinking again, like, why, for myself, why do we encourage people to go through the pain? But my answer for me today came from you talking, that I hear myself talking to young people saying, go through it, and then I say, because we just need other people helping other people on the other side. We need to start stitching the world back together. So go through the pain, get to know who you are. It's a dark journey sometimes, but when we can motivate, just be part of this club that's trying to help people stitch it back together so you can help the neighbor in pain.
Yeah. And begin
And that's
to think
sufficient. We don't need anything more than that. Yeah.
We don't need anything more, and begin to think of ourselves as citizens of the planet and citizens of the cosmos.
Yeah.
We can keep our relationship. And again, in an earlier, people forget, but we used to speak about communion of the saints.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
This is part of our beautiful heritage, and I don't want to throw it out. So here we are. Feast day of St. John the Baptist.
Yeah. How about that?
A voice crying out in the wilderness, and I'm going to listen to him.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a good place to end then. And thank you, St. John the Baptist, and thank you, David Darling.
And David Darling.
Yeah.
Thank you, Therese.
Thank you.
Love you so much.
Michael and Mike and Michael and Mickey, and thank you. Love you all. Love you all. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're going to do another one on your just specifically music Thanatology. So keep coming back, Therese.
Beautiful,
yeah,
beautiful.
Such a joy.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll link, no rush, but you can send that if you remember that book on grief that interested you. I'll link it in the thing.
I'll run right out to the library and find it.
Okay. God bless everybody. Thanks for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. We'll see you back here very soon.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Absolutely.